Wrestling fans, when I was a kid, we would travel hours to go to this tournament just because they had the coolest trophy. Well, now Spartan Combat, they're hosting a national tournament this April, and they might have the coolest trophy in wrestling. It's a Spartan helmet shield with feathers coming off it. It's beautiful. You get it for winning the Spartan Combat Nationals taking place this April in Jacksonville, Florida. Register now at SpartanCombat.com and get one of the coolest trophies in wrestling.
When you're at the world's most famous arena, and they've never been in there for the first time. And the last time I was in that building was in 2002 when Ed Aliverti was blurting out Bulgaria when Barzakov beat Dabir. I mean, it was, those iconic calls. It's just like the pressure wasn't about the event, because I've announced hundreds of events by this point. It was the fact that there are 18,000 people in here waiting for me and Brian to screw up.
We can endure anything and adapt and pivot and change. Wrestling gave us that ability.
I would say nothing in life has impacted me more than the things wrestling has taught me in terms of self-reflection, resilience.
Toughness. Some guys have it, some guys don't.
Adversity, 100%. How to pick myself up and be a man after I failed.
And everything that has shaped my life and where I'm at today would not be there without the values and basically the lessons I've learned through the sport of wrestling.
For me, wrestling saved my life because it allowed me to focus and channel my energy.
We're fortunate if you wrestle, because if you wrestle, natural talent helps, but it's 5% of the ingredient. It pales in comparison to heart and technique and effort.
It humbled me, taught me humility. Nothing can humble you more than wrestling. I think it's the learning to adapt, right? You learn how to adapt, you learn how to solve problems.
If I look back at my time I spent wrestling, if it gave me one thing more than anything else, it's mental toughness.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Wrestling Changed My Life. This is your host, Ryan Warner. Welcome to the show. We're presented by Spartan Combat. Go to SpartanCombat.com now to register for their national tournament coming to Jacksonville, Florida this April. Folks, our guest today is the godfather of podcasting, the godfather of wrestling media for all that's concerned, Jason Bryant. Jason is a multiple-time Hall of Fame broadcaster. He's announced the Olympics. He's announced the World Championships, multiple NCAAs, the Midlands. And then on the entrepreneurial front, Jason started the Matt Talk Network back in the 90s, then had a couple stints at USA Wrestling, Amateur Wrestling News, Intermat, and then in 2014 restarted Matt Talk Network, and he's done thousands of podcast episodes over the years, and is someone who's been a tremendous help to me in getting started and taking this podcast to where it is now. So awesome to have Jason on the show. Hope you enjoy this episode, folks. Fan of the week goes to our friend Kevin McNulty, representing Kingston, PA. That's Dozer22 on Instagram. Kevin, you're the man, and I really appreciate the message you sent me yesterday. Thanks for listening. And that's it, folks. Let's give it up for the Godfather, Jason Bryant.
Cool. Well, I'm ready to go if you are, my man.
Yeah, I'm just curious where you're going to start, because like your Rotundo show, he kind of did the same thing. It's like, where are you going to start? I'm like, because we did one of these before, and I wasn't really like happy with it. So
yeah,
figure it out.
We'll start at, this is one that is, I don't know why I'm going here, but I read the article, and this wrestler apparently made you weep at the Virginia State Championships, Chase McAdams.
Okay. Yeah. Tell
us about that story.
So this actually goes back to when I first ever stepped on a mat. So I got into wrestling when I had never seen a match till I was a sophomore in high school. So nationally ranked, eventually we're a nationally ranked program, but we're really good. And I knew that like the basketball, when I moved there in 7th grade, the basketball team was winless. The football team was terrible. Since the basketball team's done okay, baseball's won a couple state titles, football's won a state title since then, but wrestling was what made Pocosin, Virginia. Like that's what put them on the map. So my sophomore year, I go to a match. Actually, a buddy, Terry Daniels, says, "Hey, Jason, I'm going to a match." He was friends of the guy who helped train me on the PA when I was a freshman in high school. I was like, "Yeah, I know we're good, but I'd never been to a duel." So there it is, a Wednesday night, January, a lot warmer than it is here in Minnesota, back in Virginia. And I just I go to a match. It's pretty cool. I get hooked. And then the next year we get a new coach, and Coach Ruff had, we didn't have that many big guys in my hometown. So if you were, we always tend to be really bad at the upper weight. So historically, there's only been one heavyweight state champion at Pocosin High School. And oddly enough, he's the only Division I All-American the school's ever had too. So interesting note there. But so junior year, I come out for the squad, and this was not a good thing for me. And I'm learning, but in the process, a guy named Dan McAdams, who was a year behind me, he had lived in Pocosin, then he moved to North Carolina and had moved back, and we'd become friends again. And I was basically looking for a workout partner because there was nobody else in the room. Jeremy Gregg, who was the starting heavyweight, was moving down because he was kind of giving up a lot of weight. And I'm in there and I'm not good. And in the summer, I bring Dan out. And again, he's class 98, I'm class 97. And he's bigger than me, faster than me, stronger than me, a much better athlete than me. Basically, I brought out a guy to be my workout partner who ended up just taking the spot from me. It was like, okay, that's exactly how that happened. And so his little brother, Chase McAdams, was about 5 at the time. So Dan plays football. He was number 58. Dan was also dating one of my best friend in high school at the time too. So we spent a lot of time together anyway. Well, Chase starts playing football. He's number 58. Well, Dan starts wrestling. Chase starts wrestling. So, and around that same, I get into college, Chase had started wrestling. And, when you're first year kid, usually your first year is your worst year, especially if you've got no background in it, you got no brothers that were close to your size. I mean, Dan was probably 13 years older than Chase was. So as I get into college, Chase continues to wrestle. Dan was a year behind me. He got hurt his senior year. Actually didn't end up finishing his senior year. He did get hurt. He was pretty good. It was a match away from getting to the state tournament as a first year wrestler, which, it's kind of unheard of on a nationally ranked team. And, years go by, we start this group called the Virginia Challenge. I'm, doing Mat Talk online and at that school in Norfolk, and Frank Lapoli and some wrestling leaders start with the Virginia Challenge. And now people know it now because of the Holiday Duels, which is a giant youth middle school and elementary school tournament out in Virginia Beach. And so Chase's dad, Fred, got involved with the sport. And then, I've kind of by virtue of that, I joke that Fred, I blame you. Hey, Fred, you blame me for this? He goes, well, because I got Dan into it, Chase got into it. Then Fred starts working weigh-ins, and years go by, and Chase is marginally getting better. So fast forward to 2009, I move out to Minnesota to work for Jay Robinson and Wrestling 411. And Kyle Klingman and I did a show on Tuesday, and ODU was going to wrestle Virginia Tech on Thursday in Norfolk. And it was Virginia Tech was ranked like 15th. ODU was ranked like, 19th or something. It was going to be the biggest duel the school had ever had. I'm like, you know what? I should drive home to announce this. Kyle's like, do it. I'm like, yeah, okay. I text Mike Dixon. I said, you know what? I'm coming. He goes, what? I says, yeah. I get in the car Wednesday morning, drive straight through, get to ODU on Thursday morning, because it's about a 20-some hour drive. Wow. Get there. And I announced it's the Thursday before the state tournament in Virginia. So the state tournaments are configured a little differently, stupidly. And it's even worse now. But then you had AAA usually in a large high school. Single A and AA were on the western part of the state. So Thursday, I announce ODU Virginia Tech. ODU wins that match, and biggest crowd the school had for wrestling. Great dual meet. I mean, it was an awesome dual meet. And then the next day I go to the AAA state tournament, which is local. So I stayed local. And then the first day I get to go, and I'm like, I got to drive back. And I was like, well, you know what? I should go to Salem. Cuts 4 hours off my trip. So after the AAAs that Friday, I get in my car and I drive, and this is my vehicle. I drive to Salem, which is about 4 hours through the night, run into some old high school friends who let me sleep on the floor that are coaching, Jimmy Jones, Rob Green, and then wake up the next morning. And this is Chase's senior year. And now there was a lot of turmoil at my high school this particular year. The coach had been let go for some off the mat issues. There were some kids that had transferred in that eventually would transfer back out, end up putting, I think, 4 or 5 in the state finals, 4 state. It was like the perfect storm of things that happened with crap in this historic program. And the kids really came above it. Well, one of those kids was Chase. He was undefeated and had lost to Derek Borley, who was one of the top kids in the country out of, since they were wrestling. I think they wrestled each other in the state semis as sophomores. And, Borley went to get bigger and wrestled in Fargo and placed really high, wrestled Wisconsin, Virginia. Well, Chase had never won a state title. And I'm there. And the second day and all the turmoil, he had gotten hurt, and he goes out there and he wins the state championship. And Dan's there. Fred and Mara, their parents are there. And it was just, it was a set of circumstances that happened that, having been there when Chase started wrestling, I felt like, it was kind of like a little brother in some ways, even though I'd been gone for quite a while. And, there were some magical moments at that tournament. Andrew Williams from Tab won a 4-state title. He was from my wrestling club growing up and rival high school, but still, when Chase goes out there and wins it and beats the kid from Northside, it was just, there's these overhangs in Salem. So I went and sat back underneath the overhang and I lost my shit, dude. I cried my eyes out. I was just, and I talk about just the power of wrestling in that moment that, I didn't have anything to do with him winning that tournament. I didn't have anything with him getting better. I didn't have anything really. I mean, it was his parents that, and, he wanted to be like Dan. That's why he started wrestling. But, I bring Dan out for wrestling. What happens? Does Chase ever win a state title? Mm-hmm. If I don't bring his brother out for the team, I mean, he may have, but, in that moment, just to see the kid that went 0-16 and got pinned 16 times, his first year wrestling, go undefeated and win a state title, it's still something that gives me chills. And here we are, 13 years after the fact. And it's just one of those things, man, that it's really kind of, it really puts, I don't know if I say even puts things into perspective, but that to me is one of the most memorable moments I will ever have in my career. And I've been put to tears a couple times when it comes to wrestling. That one will be hard to top. Yeah. I called Helen Maroulis winning a gold medal in Rio, tears streaming down my face, but that might've been the gold medal for Helen, but she's still second place on that list of emotional wins for me because, just, it was my hometown. It's my, it's one of my good friends' little brothers. And, you felt like you had a little bit to do with that. And even I never accomplished that. I never started from my high school team. Obviously I brought a drill partner out who ended up taking the spot from me. So
that's so funny.
And then his brother wins the state title. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you could dig into that with it, but, and having the family be part of a wrestling family because Chase started going in. Dan was at my Hall of Fame induction when I went into the Virginia chapter. I made sure, he started dating his wife in high school. They've been together for 20 some years. And, Chase went to King University, then King College. Because he was big into racing. He actually been a short track driver at the track back home, Langley Speedway. So got away from wrestling. Once he got in college, had some injuries that stopped him, but just that moment though, 2009, just to sit there and just to show up and, his parents be like, oh my goodness, Twinkie's here. That's my nickname growing up. And it was just, they knew something was going on. Just like the stars align, like Chase is going to win this thing,
Yeah.
And, I'm not taking any credit for it clearly, but it's just, to have a little piece of something like that. Cause I don't know. I didn't make anybody better as a drill partner to help them win a state title. And that's the closest I've ever been, it's the closest I've been to something like that. And that's a moment that I will be able to explain vividly until I'm old and gray. So that's where we can start with that.
I love moments like that though. And just even like the road trip leading up to it, all the things that had to fall in line for you to be there is crazy.
Yeah. I mean, if I'd have watched it online, and it's weird. I trying to explain like the tie to your high school when I'm 42 years old, I'm coming up on my 25th year reunion. Like what, she doesn't pay any attention to what goes on at Princeton, Minnesota, but here's me. I mean, I'm still paying attention to what goes on. And, small towns are like that. And especially when, I go back for the Virginia Duels every year, my wrestling club, my hometown's pretty much the part of the lifeblood of that organization. So I want, and my friends' kids are coming through there. It's one of those, like, there's a song by Cross Canadian Ragweed called 17. And one of the key lines in it is you're always 17 in your hometown. And it's that type of place, man. So, I keep up with how the team's doing. I mean, one of my friends' kids are winning state titles and stuff like that. Kids I graduated with, their kids are wrestling. So it's just, you keep up with things like that. So I've naturally had that tie to, a place that's previously known for Allen Iverson documentaries and wrestling. That's about the two things it's known for. So that little town got me into wrestling, and that little town has provided me the biggest story that I tell about, the greatness of sport wrestling. It's the one you just started with. So well done there.
Yeah, no, it's thanks for sharing that. I didn't know how deep and how tangled the webs were there, but that's part of it. Wrestling's such a small world and everything's connected like that. How did you, so I guess if you put it in that context, you kind of were like the the turning point for this family to get involved in wrestling. How did Ed Aliverdi get involved with your life?
Virginia duels. So I'd been announcing. I knew I wanted to be a sports announcer since I was in 5th grade. I was the kid that would call in the sports radio station all the time. It started when I lived in Newport News, and then when I moved to Pocosin. Jason,
Wait, you're from Newport News?
Originally, yeah.
Michael Vick.
Yeah, he was in my brother's graduating class.
Oh,
my
shit,
stepbrother
sorry.
My stepbrother graduated from Warwick High School in '98. So did Vic. So, I've my best man at my wedding, Kurt Van Duzen, taught both Michael and Marcus in the 8th grade. So, the Vicks, we've met. We knew each other as kids. So it's not like me and Ron Mexico go that far back. But
right.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up there, moved in 7th grade. And then that's where I was friends with all the basketball players that came through Menchville and the Newport News, the bad news, as they like to call it. And, actually, I was friends with a lot of wrestlers before I even knew what wrestling was. Guys like Joey Legg, Joe Wright, the Procut brothers, all these kids, these kids I grew up with in summers at the boys club. Well, then I run into them later covering them. Wait a minute. We've spent summers at the boys club together. So, but yeah, got into sports radio and would listen to Tony Mercurio, who was the drive time guy back then. It was the only sports radio station in Virginia, and now it's an ESPN affiliate. And I was Jason from Newport News, and then Jason from Pocosin, and then Jason from ODU. And so I was all into sports, and then, started announcing baseball. First sport I announced I was 14 as a freshman, then getting in all these sports. And then 1995, again, that year. So that match against Deep Creek on that Wednesday night. Well, the guy that took me next day goes, "Hey, we're wrestling in the duels on Friday. Do you want to go?" And I had heard of the Virginia duels. They were on TV. It was a big thing. Even the radio station I've mentioned, they even did a Friday one time at the Virginia duels, and I'm listening to it. Drive has Pocosin with another pin down there. And I'm like, man, pretty good here. I mean, I remember vividly, 3 straight pins to start at Brad Jewell, Chad Jewell, and Jared Fitzpatrick. Boom, boom, boom. That was that 94 class. And then so the first time I go, we're the first year of the National High School Division. They bracketed out, and so I skipped school on a Friday to go, and half the school was there. It wasn't really kind of frowned upon to skip school to watch Virginia duels, and beat the 18th ranked team in the country from Georgia. Kind of got hooked on it there. Well, the announcer was Ed Aliverdi, and it was this colorful, just poeticness of I don't know how to really describe it. Red, white, and blue, we've got to fall on 2. I'm like, who is this guy? But it wasn't until the next year I went, because I didn't go to the finals that year because they finished 7th, and I was actually playing rec basketball. I had to go to my game in the afternoon session. The next year I'm with the student paper, and I'm covering this as a junior. Even I'm kind of around the program, not really on the team, but kind of on the team kind of thing. And this is where I get the full Ed Aliverdi experience. And he is just wit, just passion, just the way he would command the microphone. And I don't have his type of voice. I borrow a couple things from Ed, but I don't model myself after Ed. But there are some things that he does that I could never quite nail. But there are some things that he brought to the sport of wrestling. Like, man. And I felt like I'd watched kind of what he did, and I kind of brought that kind of mentality to the other sports I did, because I now ended up announcing 8 sports in high school. And then he did even more, got into different sports in college, and even have announced roller derby of all things, but with an outfit and costume and everything. So when I meet Ed, and I'm, Ken Berger, his co-announcer, who I've known for many years and announced events with and around the world, really. And Ed is and I'm not really bothering Ed a whole lot, because then the media table and the head table weren't really close. Then when they put them together, that's when I really got to know him a couple years later. And his preparation. He had the sheets, and this is before really you could look all this stuff on track and internet. He was research. He had the pronunciations. And one year, I think it was 98, on my first year in college, Oklahoma State comes in, and I remember Coach Ruff was still at Pocosin and was cleaning up the room. I was like, I went back home and picked something up, and he's like, it's 20 minutes from where I grew up, and it was like, oh, hey, coach, what are you cleaning? Oklahoma State, we got number 1 team in the country. Oklahoma State's coming in. He is scrubbing the wrestling room left and right, because the teams would come in and work out at the local high schools. And that year, Roger Moore, who, people know is a broadcaster for OSU and a writer and a journalist, he was the SID for Oklahoma State. And he's talking about Oklahoma State incessantly next to me, talking about how good Teague Moore was. Teague Moore was a sophomore, and just lights up this kid from App State in the first round. Well, on the backside, App State is wrestling North Carolina. And So it's a consolation match in the bracket. And this is one of the most distinct things I remember Ed ever doing. He goes, coming out there for Carolina, that's my. Coming out there for App State, that's my. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, twin brothers wrestling on mat 1. My, oh my, what's a mother to do? And I'm like, oh my goodness. That was and then he gets out there and does his America the Beautiful. America. Just if you've ever, it's just, and it's one of those things, if you've never seen it before, you do not know what to expect. And it's really hard to like contain your laughter because it's not what you expect to see. All you wrestling people that have been doing this for years know what's coming when he did the anthem. And one year I remember sitting next to Nick Fierro from the Eastern Express Times at the time. He covered the Eagles for a long time too. And I was like, oh, have you ever heard Aliverdi? No. It's like, be prepared. So then he sees it. And Bobby Stinson's out there for Camden Catholic, just trying to hold in his composure in those robes that they got. And they said they make eye contact in the middle of Edge's thing. And they both kind of like, they almost lose it. Then one year, 2 writers like, oh, you guys never seen this? Oh, be prepared. And I stepped away from them because I knew what was going to happen. And you just don't expect it. But Ed, every time I'd walk by and be like, hello, young man. You're just such a nice guy. Never big timed anybody. And it was, it took me a while to own up the courage to actually ask him for advice because I didn't want to seem like I was kind of stealing his shtick because, when you're young, you're arrogant, you're egotistical, you think I can do that. Well, it took me a long time to get to the point where I even had the opportunity to do that. But it's also, you want to develop your own style. But Ed was always very eloquent, very respectful. He was such a good human being. Him and his wife, Shirley, would always say hello. They'd always make sure time to take, in the middle of all the chaos, they'd take time to talk to you. And, I spent a lot more time with Ken Berger as a mentor mentee type of thing, but Ed was always a guy that it's kind of hard to, it's like trying to follow Gable, that was going to be tough for Zaleski, following Ed Aliverdi or following Sandy, following these people in the role I do, there's always going to be that comparison. So, but thankfully I'm friends with them and I was friends with Ed and he was always very cool and somebody that I really wish this generation of kids coming through really would have had the opportunity to hear what poetry he would do on the microphone. I don't have that poetic sense or that entertainer sense. I've got more of the snarl and stats and dad jokes. I've now introduced a lot of dad jokes and maybe even a pro wrestling reference or two. I think the Spanish announce table almost always biffs it at nationals when heavyweights go through it. So, you kind of have a little bit of fun with it, but he kind of taught me that wrestling can be fun, can be entertaining. You can make a joke and still not have this whole thing be about you. So Ed was really good at that and really kind of helped me put my career on track in a lot of ways. And when I had a chance to do the Virginia duels, when his wife had a stroke one year, I remember at the PWA meeting, as we're coming up on the Virginia duels this week, I mean, we're talking 21 years ago, they're like, Ed can't make it. Shirley's in the hospital. Now Shirley recovered and they came back the next year, but, and I raised my hand and I'm like, who's going to help Ken announce? And it was like this slow thing where like everybody in the room just kind of turned and looked at me and kind of went, well, we were kind of hoping. And so, getting the opportunity to step in there really kind of, in Ed's place to announce, it was kind of, again, big shoes to fill. Cause you're taking the place of a legend just temporarily there. And that really,
so how many years after that initial just temporary fill in from the first time you heard him, would you say?
I heard him in 90. Okay. So I went to the duels in 95.
Yeah.
Covered it in 96, heard him 96. I was announcing in 2001. So It was 5 years later. And I had since been announcing other sports. I announced all the matches at ODU for, over a decade. So, but yeah, I was pretty fresh into the sport of wrestling by the time I was on the mic in the Hampton Coliseum for the first time. So,
but you had spent 5 years though, grinding it out, if not longer, doing a ton of sports, honing your skill.
That was the thing. I didn't know wrestling was going to be my thing. Honestly, I didn't. I was expecting to graduate from school and be on SportsCenter by the time I was 25. Well, I didn't get out of school till I was like 8 days before I turned 25. So life happens. I was an extended undergrad at that school in Norfolk. So
was your dream to write for ESPN or like be a broadcaster?
No, dude, I wanted to be Dan Patrick and Keith Olbermann. I wanted to be that guy, and then, doing the funny highlights and just being, I worked in the newspaper in the sports department. So I was already snagging phones at 16 years old and, designing baseball page, doing, putting roundups together. And those scoreboard pages, those pages of agate where you see all the standings. That was me. I was just in there. I was laying those pages out. I was also doing just various things with professional sports and stats. They'd let me cover high school football, wrestling, and I covered some college sports here and there, but yeah, my thought was, and in that era, Dream Job comes through. I don't know if you remember that with, Mike Hall won Dream Job. Now he's been on the Big Ten Network for a while. And it was a reality show. If you won, you got an ESPN contract. And people were like, oh, dude, you'd be perfect for that. And I just kind of shook my head. I'm like, no, I don't want to win. I don't want to get there because of a gimmick. Yeah. And now Mike is a tremendous broadcaster, and he's proven that he is not a gimmick in that respect. I think a lot of people have forgotten that he won Dream Job, unless you were in that era. But I felt like I'd been doing all this work to, I stayed home. I didn't go to a big journalism school, broadcasting school, because I had all those local connections that I'd spent years in high school attaining. So I really thought I was going to be on SportsCenter. I mean, my goal when I was a kid was to be the most recognizable sports broadcaster in history. Lofty goals to have, obviously, shoot high and see where you land. Well, no, I'm not going to be a Cosell. I'm not going to be a Berman. I'm not going to be, Madden's a different entity because he was colored and he's a former coach, but you're not going to be that iconic voice that everybody, Vin Scully, John Facenda, those guys, that'd be cool to do.
Yeah.
But I know that I still got a lot of life left in terms of maybe pivoting, but I love wrestling too much. I think I'm here for the long haul.
I mean, look at how far, you've gone in that sense. Obviously you mentioned earlier the Olympics, and we're going to talk about that, but announcing the Olympics is just unbelievable. But you were one of the few who worked inside the newspaper before the internet. And I have to go back to just I want to go into the newsroom when it's like people smoking cigarettes, no internet. Like this.
Well,
is
we didn't have smoking in there. There was nobody
done
smoking
by then.
Yet.
Okay,
yeah,
it wasn't that long ago.
Warner Hessler, the late Warner Hessler, one of the he covered the Redskins for a long time. The team formerly known as the Redskins. And he was a big hockey guy. He had spent time covering the Sabres in his career. And I mean, he was the guy that you would see in the paper. You'd open up, and there's the column on the sidebar. It says, let's open up the hotline. What's wrong with the Redskins? It was like his column every week, because it was a Redskins fan area. And Warner really was a great mentor in terms of writing. But the story was, because he really never worked from the office anyway. I'd see him in the office every now and then. And one of my guys on the desk be like, been working here 10 years. It's the second time I've ever seen Warner in the office. And I was like, I've been working here 2 months and I'd seen him both times. So it was pretty nuts. But, that was the old newsroom was there. Yeah. Warner's desk used to be, cigarette butts everywhere, but no, it was not quite like that when I got it. But when I started there, actually, I was working at a Blimpie sub shop in Hampton, Virginia, right on the corner of Coliseum Boulevard and Mercury Boulevard. So really like a block from where the Hampton Coliseum was. And I was working there, and Mike Holtzclaw, who was a local sports writer who I'd gotten to know through, announcing at baseball and all these games. He was he was doing the high school stuff. So whenever they covered a Pocosin game, they'd see me, and I'm, as interested in sports as I was and read the paper, I knew who they were. And, they know, oh, you're the kid from Pocosin, blah, blah, blah. Well, I'm working at a Blimpie sub shop, which I will tell you, when you're overweight at 16 years old, not the best place to develop a strong sense of self-esteem. Trust me, because your shirt says Blimpie on it. Okay. Yeah, a lot of jokes there. A lot of jokes. Good subs. It was the only place that had a really good pastrami, except for the Anna's back home in Pocosin. Shout out Anna's. So Mike comes through, and this is right before my senior year. And I was like, oh, Mike Holtzclaw. He's like, oh, hey, oh, Jason, what's up? And I told him, and of course, I immediately start talking wrestling. And we were supposed to wrestle Denby and Oscar Smith, two high schools in the area, at the Titan kickoff. And I told him that. So, and I asked and said, I didn't know how internship works. I was like, you guys got any internships there at the paper? And here's me thinking, I want to get it out of my way before I get to college, not knowing that's not how it works. You get college credit for that while you're in college. Mm-hmm. Well, that information changed like a week later, because I think, it was always this thing. Denby never wanted to wrestle us, and we were the AA school and they were AAA, and, they were always talking a big game. They won the district. We mashed them every time we wrestled them until both teams got pretty bad. I don't know if they've ever beaten us since the 90s. Maybe. I'll be corrected by the Denby folk quickly when they see this. But so I call back. I call the office number, and he's there a week or so later. And I say, hey, yeah, that information changed. Denby didn't want to wrestle us, of course, because you're an arrogant 16-year-old. You're gonna whatever. He goes, oh, by the way, there's some openings for some clerks here in the sports department. I know you had said something that you wanted to know about, getting a, internship or something. I was in my 81 El Camino with A-Track player that day, going down there, getting the application. So
nice. That's
how that started. Now, when I got hired as a clerk, and you're on like a 90-day probationary period, and I thought I was going to lose my job right away. because there was this thing called the community page, and you had to type in all these local bowling scores, and it took forever. And stupid, the first week I'm doing it, I did them numerically, no email. So I'm looking at, okay, I'm organizing them high 300 to down, and didn't realize you just got to type them in. They don't care about the order. So I kind of botched that twice. And then they're like, you do good stuff over here. You screwed that up. And I'm like, okay, this is your one last chance. So I was like on thin ice before I even really got going. And then they took me off the community page for a while. And then I went back and did it right. And, but in the newsroom, it's interesting because back then, before the internet, so we would we'd log in to these terminals, and they were blue screens, and it was called C-Text. And people before that, no hot type and stuff like that, we would get press releases that were faxed in. Then there was no internet. So everything was through the AP wire. You'd have to search, it's like, it was like using a DOS prompt is probably how I'd best describe it, because you'd have to enter directory structures, and there's your list. And it was big boxy type, and then you would have to it was almost also like HTML formatting. So it'd be like caret UFAG. So something, I don't know what the U stands for. The font AG means agate, and then you close the bracket, and then you type something in, and then you do the close slash thing. And that's how the text goes 6 point to this, because then you'd send it to the Quark terminals where they would lay it out in Quark Express. And that's how that got done. The only internet in the building was in the library. And so this is 1996. So when I started my website, in 97, I'd go in the library to make sure and see, did I get more hits today? I got 10 hits today. Cool. So, I was working there before I even started the website. So yeah, we get faxes, and they would come in through the wire.
So what does that mean? Like when you say you access the AP wire, how did you access it?
They had terminals. There was an internet, but it wasn't like web browser. So it's not I'm going ap.org or something like that. No, you had a terminal, and you'd log in and you'd search. Okay. I'm trying to remember what the codes were, but you'd see all these tags. You'd be like -AP BKN basketball national, or F, FBN, FBA. I think that's what they were. FBC college football, BKC college basketball. So you'd have all these codes that you would search in directories, and that's how you would get things on the wire. You hit refresh. Okay, there's the story. Then you'd hit this combination of letters there was a macro in the program that would send it to Microsoft Word, and then it would format, or no, it would send it to C-Text in format. When I came back to the newspaper, a year or so later, finally we were in Microsoft Word, and the whole thing, we actually had the internet in the office, but we had the email system was at Jazzbury, that's my emails. There was no jbryant@dailypress.com yet. So there were no outside email addresses. So, I remember even trying to put the Virginia Duels website, which was like somebody's personal server with a tilde. A tilde would not print. There was no figure for tilde in C-Text. It wouldn't even show up, because I don't know if you remember, old ESPN was espn.sportzone.net/sports or something like that. Well, this was Chasmo/tilde VA Duels. It was just some weird combination. But yeah, back in the day with the wire, it was, I just have a vague recollection of it, because I started there in August of 96, literally days after I turned 17, and just, going, and then a year and a half, I took a couple months off, came back. And when I come back, there was the internet, it was Word, formats were different. Searches were still same, because the wire was still working the same way. But things had changed over the years. But it's just, that's really where a lot of my, how I format scores and how I write just came from. There's no better way to learn than right in there, seeing everything. And
so would you do one article a day, or how many?
No, I wasn't. When you're a clerk, you're not writing yet.
But once you became a writer, once you were in the thick of it,
still there's presentation and gathering. So typically, if you're a presentation, you're writing, you're not right. You're not one or the other. Being a part-timer, I had the ability to, okay, well, we need Jason the string. Let's send him out to football. So I'd usually cover a football game a week, maybe two, depending on scores. But usually the where they need you is Friday night with those phone calls. So you come in, because we've got 100 schools in the coverage area. So you're picking up the phone, be like, Daily Press Sports, Jason. I have a school, they say I have a score. Okay. Final Benchville 45, Woodside 12. Okay. Who's home team? Okay. So Woodside by quarters, 7-3, 4, okay, 14. And then, okay, scores, they do the score, and then you take that box score, and then you'd write a brief from it. And then you'd put a bunch of them together. So, at an early age, I was getting stuff written. I didn't get a byline for any of that stuff, because it's all staff reports, it's phoners. But as they start seeing you write more and they, want to write more, they're like, okay, well, let's put you on a game. And it started where I'd come in and I'd write something up, and then, I had the afternoon game, and the editor would look at it. And if it was good, I mean, they go through and, editors edit, even the good writers have their stuff edited. So it was, it's not like you work in a newspaper, you start writing. So basically they gave me a couple test events to come out. And then they were comfortable with me working on deadline, and working on a story on deadline. That's a different type of pressure. Well, even laying out pages on deadline, that's okay. We have 4 editions of the newspaper back then. I'm not sure now, the paper's been sucked up by another organization, but back then we had 4 editions on Friday. There were 2 editions on Sunday. So the coverage area, you get your scores in, and you have to send the paper to print for the outlying areas. So if you're in the center of Chicago, like Hoffman Estates is getting a different one, the western suburbs are getting this one. The closer you get to the center is the more timelier the stuff is. So we got to get 1050 is first deadline. Okay, if it's not in by 1050, it's not getting into King William. Sorry, you're not getting that. Then there was the South of the James edition, the Gloucester edition, and then final was the one that pretty much had everything in it. 1150, 1230 deadlines, depending on when it is. So you'd have to sit there, and that page has to be gone. So you're typing, and you've got to send it to somebody. They've got to put it on the page. And when that page, okay, it's been proofed, printed, go, hit send, it goes to the press in the back. And the Daily Press had their own printing facilities. So they'd come in about, 20 minutes later, here it is. You look through the actual paper for the next day. It'd be like, okay, what else? And you trade and see, okay, we got about 15 minutes to rest before we go to the next deadline. All right. Okay. Well, this word's misspelled. That first edition would get every typo and every screw up ever. By the time, basically had 4 times to get it right by the time you got to final. So, but when you're you need the story in by 10:15. I mean, because the people working the desk have to edit it and put it on the page. That's what's pressure. And then when you're not even talking about when you're writing, like when you're laying out pages. So I was doing the baseball page for a while, and you look at 7:05 starts, you're getting in for first edition. 8:05, you might, if the game goes fast, you might get in for first. Mountain time or games in Colorado, you're not getting. West Coast games typically you would see in the first edition open up says like Cubs at Dodgers, late. That's what you would see. Well, we don't get those. You might get them for final, and then they would call run back. So you'd run that box score back the next day and say late Friday. So one of the most crazy things about working in a newspaper is when you've got the baseball page laid out, there's a certain way you have to do it. Box scores don't break over to the next column, and you have to put the little gamers in there. And then here comes a no-hitter in the 8 o'clock starting spot. And you're like, do we get it in for first? And it's like, especially if it's a big gun. If it's like, Kerry Wood's tossing a no-no or a perfect game, you're like, is it going on the front or is it going on the baseball page? Because if it's going on the front, they take it, you're good. Now, if it's going on your page, they're going to change the front. You're going to have to redesign the page. And 4 hours of work that you've just done, you're going to have to change in 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I mean, it's nuts. The pressure. And that was also one reason I kind of left the industry is when you do that enough, and granted, there's a lot, and the industry has changed, and especially with the internet, is, you say you work at the paper. Oh, what do you write? There's people that work in advertising. There are people that work there are people that work in newspapers for 30 years that don't write a single word in that particular paper. They're editors, they're designers, they're copy editors. I did a lot of copy editing, but it's sit there, you open up the paper, people go, oh, great story. Well, they don't go, man, whoever designed page B4 with that no hitter in the 9th did a great job. They don't think about that. So part of that industry is when you're in a media role, and there's a degree of ego that comes with being in the media, is there's really the job satisfaction starts to wane. And that was one thing that was kind of like rough. And, as a part-timer, I wasn't getting paid certain things. And then when I went full-time, I was full-time copy editing and laying out pages. No longer was I writing wrestling, which was kind of an issue because I was told I was going to be able to do that. And then that presentation gathering thing I alluded to earlier didn't happen. But when I started writing a lot more, they gave me the columns for, I started covering wrestling. They gave me a weekly wrestling column. So I had the notebook, and I got my rankings in the paper from the website. So had an opportunity to get a lot of wrestling in the paper because of my competence level and the fact that they trusted me and they thought I did a pretty good job. So that was a lot of the stuff back home. And remember, I haven't worked at a newspaper since November of 2004. Right. So we're doing a long time ago. I mean, we're still talking, Intermat was still, I went to leave to work for them, but the point is like the early days of the newspaper, well, not even early days, like my early days of the newspaper were still very, you got to get it read, you got to get edited, you get quotes, things called write throughs where you get a first one on that's 10 inches. Okay, write through. Let's add the quotes that we just got. you see that with the, if you get that first edition paper, you got this little story. Then you get, here's the manager quotes, the player quotes. Then they have the longer edition for the bigger papers. So for the later edition. So that's how that works. And it is, tell you what, working on a news desk is a stressful, blood pressure inducing, weight gain having, because you work nights, man. Your diet's not great, especially when you're in your 20s, single, partying, and it wasn't conducive to a great lifestyle back then. But there is no better training I've had for my career, and I still take things that I had from the newspaper industry that worked, and they work for wrestling. They still work for wrestling in terms of like coverage on weblog. They call it a weblog, and now then it became a blog, and became a notebook, and then became a live blog. I mean, there's so many things that I actually had that experience in the newspaper industry that I brought to wrestling. And, it's what I brought back into wrestling, covering it on my own website for Mat Talk Online when it was a Virginia site, on the internet, and where I've been since then. I joke that I've had more jobs in wrestling than Sammy Henson, maybe Wade Chalice, depending on your generation. But, a lot of those things that I feel I learned in the newspaper have helped me so much more in covering wrestling, because I looked at it from a news perspective and from okay, here, that the triangle, what's the most important, and go down. I mean, to the point, talking back to my Hall of Fame induction, I invited my high school journalism teacher, Mark Vandervoort, and his wife Dot. She was the yearbook teacher. I had them back to back for newspaper and yearbook. I mean, that impact that they had were things I learned in journalism in high school and working in the trenches in the newsroom. So that's one of those things that you kind of look at some of the writing and stuff that goes on now. You're like, none of these people worked a second in the newsroom. They don't know what it's like to actually formulate something in that, okay, some people can say journalism writing is tired, but there's still a way to do things when you're trying to tell a story or cover something. Yeah. I mean, doing a gamer, I mean, this past weekend, for example, I was telling my wife this yesterday. I was at the multi-divisional national duels, and I was there with the NWCA, and I took care of the wraps, and I was sitting there writing the wrap for, we got 6 divisions to cover, get quotes. I'm like, I got back home, and man, I forgot how much of a grind it is to get a full, a PR style wrap up, but also write it journalistically. Cause I never wrote, who, what, when, where, why. I had some quotes, go with some personal angles and stuff like that. And I just realized, man, that's how wrestling coverage used to be, was you waited for this big block of text. Yeah. And now I think people have forgotten how to do that. There's still a valuable skill in knowing how to write.
That's why I wanted to ask you about it. Cause as I get more into, writing and just kind of refining everything you put out there, I remember early on, you shoot me some messages saying, hey, that's misspelled, or this is misspelled. And I was just, I would feel so bad about it, but I appreciated the help. But then I'm thinking, man, you probably got that way because if you messed up in the newsroom back then, they'd probably have you out for it.
It have. Oh, okay. So I've screwed up a couple. I mean, I've screwed up a lot. I mean, here's the thing. Like, that's where I've got that experience. Cause I've made I will joke with some people in wrestling that are in the wrestling media. It's like, no, look, I've made every mistake you can probably make, with the except, right. On the ethical scale. It's not like the unethical stuff. That's not, I'm saying I've made the typos. I've actually written Cyclones instead of Hawkeyes on the front page of Intermat. Now, granted, it was up for about 10 seconds, but I put Cyclones beat Cyclones. It was one of those things, like, in between ideas. And that's the thing, to the credit of those out there hustling right now, you don't have copy editors in this world, and it's so hard to edit your own writing because you're going to read over the same thing you wrote it. Of course it's right. I wrote it. And, that's why, I sometimes ask, like last week, one of my stories got back read, caught a couple of errors last time I ever had to go. And there probably something on that last release I put out from the NWCA that went out there. And, but when, I had, what did I have? One time, okay, so Annika Sorenstam, remember her, the pro golfer?
Yeah.
Made history by playing in a men's event. It was called the Colonial. Well, every major event that was in golf, we had the golf layout. So it was it was on the front page. We had the special golf page. And, it wasn't an issue. So Sorenstam is a front page story, but the score, I thought there was going to be a separate section for the Colonial scores. Well, there wasn't. They were supposed to go in scoreboard, the page I was laying out. I get up and leave because all right, I'm done. We have to clear the pages out. Okay, there's no more updates for the scoreboard. I'm done after second. I'm going home. Well, I'm in the car driving out, and my boss, Mario, calls and goes, hey, man, where are the Colonial scores? And I'm like, well, don't we have a golf page? I didn't think enough to even look at the rest of the budget. They call it the budget, which is where things are going. I just made the assumption that the golf scores were going on the golf page. There was no golf page. This was because the Colonial itself was not a major or a big, that deserved a whole, 2-page golf spread. So she got the front, you got an inside, the jump from the inside or to the inside, but the scores were still going on scoreboard. First edition didn't get them. They went back and had to tweak my mistake. And that was one thing. And then
when it goes out in print like that, it's so different than when you mistype something where you can just edit online. Cause then you got to sit with that. For a while.
So there's also another story is when things get missed. Now I wasn't privy to this one, but this became kind of a running joke. Those of you at the Daily Press, my friends that actually we still keep in touch. They will know the band Gwar has a very special place in the heart of the Daily Press because not once, but twice we ran a big giant green cartoon dick in the newspaper. Okay. We had this inside section. I think, what was it called? It was like the concert page that comes out on Friday. So here's what's coming up on the weekends. It was like an insert. Mm-hmm. And the pulled graphic was a cartoon graphic of Gwar, which if for those of you that don't know, just Google it, go to YouTube, not safe for work most of the time. Kind of a shock rock, kind of like artsy fartsy, gory, fake blood everywhere. It's a very kind of gross, kind of funny. It's like dark comedy kind of thing, but it's pretty graphic. Well, the main character, I can't remember. It was like something Among Us or whatever. I can't say I'm a huge Gwar fan by any stretch of the imagination. I am kind of familiar with their music. Well, has a big giant phallus. Just a boot. Okay. Well, that was in the paper. And what was interesting is the cut line. It was called Wild Art, which was just a picture that had nothing to do with anything else and had maybe a little headline and a cut line that said what it was. Well, it was Monster Rock because they were talking about the graphics about like, okay, yeah, because they're monsters and they rock. One of the comments that were written into the the paper that they would publish the comments was like, man, there's never been more suitable headline than that. Well, so that was the Gwar incident. Well, a couple years later, Gwar comes back on tour and they put the same picture in the paper again. Now, different staff everywhere. And I remember once, oh man, I almost got my buddy fired for this one. The late Kevin Allen, he passed away a couple years ago, but he was that 6'9", funny dude, Florida Gator. He always tells me, he hated FSU so much. Why you can't spell felon without Noel. One of those things, just always had those little anti-Florida State things. Well, we're sitting at this company-wide meeting. I'm going to go to this meeting. And I never went to the big stuff. So Ronnie Matthews, she's the publisher, and they're talking to the whole newsroom, the whole staff, everything. This is in the afternoon. And, she says, we did a lot of great things this year. And under my breath, I'm standing next to Kevin. I'm like, yeah, like put a giant green dong in the paper. And he just turns purple, just trying to hold his laugh. He had to go into the bathroom and laughing. So, so that was like the biggest mistake the Daily Press to mine. And I remember Kevin Bradford, one of my old assistant editors, would be like, what was that person pissed about? He goes, we put shit in the paper. Like the word, you want to think pearl clutching on the internet is crazy. I said something, somebody sat in for Javi Lopez one time catching for the Braves. And I had these little things when I'm doing a baseball page, and whoever filled in for him while he was on the DL, I was like, who needs Javi Lopez? And the catcher they brought up from Richmond was hitting like 465 that week. And so I made him like the player of the day or something. A woman called me like the next day. I just happened to answer the phone. Yeah, I want, who wrote that about that? I was like, yeah, I do. I just didn't think it was very nice, and hung up on me. I'm like, man. Okay. So it was just a joke, man. My editor, Jim Hodges, I tried to get mullet into the newspaper countless times in the baseball page, and he nixed it every single time. Craig Wilson of the Pittsburgh Pirates had a glorious blonde mullet in one part of the season. I tried to, the mullet.
You write about it?
You can have fun with some of those little things. And like, you're like, okay, mullet laden Craig Wilson went 4 for 5 last night with no, it's sometimes you could get that in. So I mean, there's a lot of things that you do in the newsroom. You could slide some inside jokes in there that were pretty funny. But as far as the errors in the paper, to back to your initial point, if one time we put I didn't do this one, but one of my coworkers put a score between York and Lafayette was flipped. A couple of high schools, and I see it the next day. I'm like, hey, Lafayette won that game, and she's sitting right in front of me, and I'm just like, and they look at me like. They're like, no, because like she made the mistake. Yeah. And they were pointing at her, like looking at me going, no. And I'm like, oh shit. So because you don't work every day when you're a part-timer. But some of those interesting times in the paper, man. I'm thinking about you. We're going back in time here, man. That was a fun time, but man, it was very stress inducing. And that's not even the wrestling stuff.
I'm reading a book right now about it's called This is Chicago Trib, The Rise of the Great American Newspaper, and it's fascinating.
Trib owned. We were a Trib owned newspaper.
Really?
So
there you go.
So we had the intranet. We had the employee directory. Guess who was in our employee directory with their home telephone listed?
Hit me.
Dusty Baker.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So the entire Cubs front office was in the Tribune directory because the Tribune owned the Cubs.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
we'd always like,
that's,
man, do we call Johnny B Dusty Baker right now?
Oh, yeah.
No,
but it's like fascinating to hear that, though, about just kind of, you hear about those stories and then, to talk about some of the lessons you learned, because a lot of that, you read a lot of blogs now where things are just so obviously misspelled. And not that didn't happen back then. I just got to think that there was a higher level, a higher rigor of discipline when it came to editing and you're really refining the story before you just put it out. So I love hearing about that stuff.
Well, and it's not, and the thing is, here's the thing. When you're a local editor, like, so say I'll get the baseball page, and that means every AP writer story, if it's, Paul Newberry, or if my buddy Joe Reedy's covering the Chargers or something that comes through. Yes, I'm name dropping. If you sit there and you see it, and then you catch, what that AP writer the first time will put something in for their first run, and it doesn't get caught by their editors, and then you got me, 20-something-year-old catches it. It doesn't go in our paper, and then you'll see an edit come through. Those the couple edits. When they find it, they'll put a new one out. So every subsequent one, usually you find it, you go replace it because you've got, hours before the stuff comes out. But I remember specifically one time I'm sitting there, and again, I'm on a terminal. Behind me is the guy, Jim Hodges, who I really consider one of the guys that really helped me understand editing and has basically taught me the usage of the compound modifier. Now, being such as in the words that I am, I'm not a huge grammar, stickler for certain grammar things. Now, say the word pinfall around me, everybody kind of knows my take on that, because it's either for bowling or pro wrestling. It hasn't been used in amateur wrestling, which I don't even like amateur wrestling, but it hasn't even been used in our world of wrestling since the 50s. It hadn't been, anyway. If you hear that, you see that, it's either somebody that doesn't know what they're doing, or they're a brand new SID, or they just don't really care about it. So when it was compound, like narrowly missed. Compound modifier, you hyphenate here. Well, walk off. He goes, no, game winning RBI. And then one time I saw an SID from a school that shall remain nameless, right? Walk off pinfall. I about shit my pants. I was like, come on. So that played to one thing I hate the most, which I think comes from a message board post back in 2004. And then, certain things about, well, anyway, back to the story, was the word I found in this AP story. I'm like, and I'm sitting there and I've got the proof and I'm reading it. And I'm like, what the hell? What is, I'd never seen this word before in my life. I go, Jim, what's this? He goes, recalcitrant. I'm like, okay. He gave me the explanation, standoffish kind of thing. I'm like, okay. I can't remember if that's the exact meaning, but it was something not great. It was kind of describing a player's mood. He was said the recalcitrant coach. I'm like, the heck does that mean? So sometimes you find new words when you're, but that's one thing. I was like, I said, we should probably get rid of that. He goes, yeah. So I got rid of it because if I'm, I don't want to, like I said, I'm into words, but I'm not into grammar. Right. If I don't know that word, I guarantee you most of our readers aren't going to get that word. So let's toss it. But yeah, typos are kind of, I don't get mad about typos as much as I get mad about factual errors. Now, there's a difference between a mistake by blanking on something and then, willful ignorance. So if you've got, if you just don't know something because you didn't care to look it up, that's on you. Now, if you just blank on something, like I put a tweet out the other day, and that's another thing, Twitter, wish there was an edit button, because I'll catch one little thing, my apostrophes, it's versus IT apostrophe S. I'm like, even I have Twitter blue and I still miss it. So, but the typos happen. And most of them happen.
Sorry, go ahead.
You got the red underline. You should, and autocorrect. Damn you, autocorrect.com. There's a whole website because of autocorrects things. I think I was typing a word the other day and it autocorrected to Hochstrasser. Okay. Really? So, I get more about factual issues. Typos happen. Yep. How many times has Logan Stevers' name been spelled wrong? Muzaffar Abdurrahmanov, saying it is a lot easier to spelling it. I don't really worry so much about it because you can go back and tweak that. Okay. But typos in graphics where you've got to look at it, when typos in a 1,000-word story, you're going to make one. Every story I've written in my life probably had a mistake in it, just because that's the nature of the beast. I don't know. I was even joking how many words I'd written, and I have a pretty low typo ratio because I'm pretty much, I will try to make sure I get every name, every word spelled, but sometimes there's a 2 versus not 2. Certain double words and that grammar check and things like that. I don't use Grammarly. I don't trust it, but sometimes you just can't avoid them. So typos get a pass unless you keep doing it. Or if it's in a headline and a graphic that 3 people have read, things of that nature. I mean, sometimes you just, and then sometimes you don't care and you're not, quality control. So there's a couple things to go into it, but yeah, a typo in a newspaper is, I guarantee if you read a newspaper cover to cover, you'd find 100.
Yeah. No,
every day.
That's good to hear. And just good to know. It's a reminder to don't be so hard on yourself. I wanted to shift a little bit to being in the announcing world, because you think about some of the events that stick out to you: 2014 Worlds, NCAAs at Madison Square Garden, 2016 Olympics. Where do you rank those in terms of just moments where, if you go back there and just bottle that feeling of atmosphere?
2015 Worlds, because I didn't announce 14. 14 was in Tashkent, which
the one in Vegas. I'm sorry,
yeah, Tashkent, man. My buddy, Leroy Gardner, the coach at University of Ozarks, his wife's from Tashkent, so I love her. I don't want to disparage Tashkent, but man, I don't ever want to go back there. But Vegas, Vegas was a bit of a rush, and because again, I got to announce it with Ken. I worked, AL and Sandy were part of the team. Brian Hazard was down there on the floor, announced with ESPN, and it was just, and we'd have me, Ken, and Hazard each night would do our little bios and stuff. But, when I got that opportunity, that was something that was, what the coaches say, it's not like, it's like, do your best. When in those situations, you're just like, don't screw up. And I'm on my way to the airport and I'm nervous, and I get nervous. I mean, I had Little Rock, Oklahoma State 2 nights ago, and right before the starting lineups, which I've done wrestling dual meet announcements for 20 some years, I still get that heavy heartbeat. Oh, I still get amped up and I get nervous every single time. I can be calm, but I can still, the watch tells me my heart rate. Here it is, 130 beats a minute when I'm sitting there about to announce Little Rock and Oklahoma State in front of 1,500 people. Where Madison Square Garden, a little bit more pressure. Oof. But Vegas being a world championship and it being kind of really a coming out party, because, I haven't done the Midlands up at that point for about 5 or 6 years. And the EIWAs was a jumping off point when I lived in Lancaster. But again, a lot outside the East Coast had never heard me in that role. So it really was, again, I'm riding to the airport with my wife and I'm freaking out. Like it's 5 a.m. I'm just wigging out. She's like, "What's wrong?" I'm nervous. And he's like, she goes, "What's on your mind?" Like, don't fuck up. She goes, no. Do your best. Don't screw up. It's like going into wrestling. You go into wrestling, don't lose. No, go out to win. Don't not lose. Go out to not lose. It's that same kind of thing. That's how I kind of equate to wrestling. Now, I do not apply wrestling virtues to my life. I'm not like, I'm going to be, wrestling did change my life. I don't go, man, yeah, I learned this from the wrestling mat because that was tough. No, I just sucked, man. I learned that hard work sucks sometimes. I mean, I learned that about myself in wrestling and certain things you can push through in that. But that was the one thing in Vegas was like, don't screw up, don't fuck up, part of my language. You have to put the explicit tag on the show because that's what podcasters do.
Yeah.
And it was just like, man. And that's kind of like, it just kind of, you go, oh, all right, just do your best. Screw ups will happen. So you want to say you're over the course of 7 days, you're going to say something wrong. If you worry about, it's like your typo point. If you worry about every little typo as a writer, you're not going to get any better. If you worry about every little flub you're going to make on a microphone as the only person talking in front of it, that case, 9,000 people at Madison Square Garden, 18,000 people. Oh my gosh. Can you think about at US Bank Stadium if we weren't canceled in 2020? There'd been 45,000 people hanging on your every word. You want some of that pressure?
Right.
And if you say one thing wrong, the person in the stands that knows more than you about wrestling, because I know most everybody goes to that national tournament knows more than me about wrestling, there's some pressure there. So Vegas, we got through it. And that Vegas was just a grind because it's 7 days and you got 2 announcers. That's nice. You can split it. And again, that was the coming out party, I guess. And because that led to me getting Rio because I met, Pedro from Brazil through the Save Olympic Wrestling movement. But then Madison Square Garden comes. And that pressure, there's a different story with that because, we talked about Ed, and Sandy being a dear friend. And she was like she's like a third grandmother to my especially my oldest. And, having worked with her at Midlands and been around her at countless tournaments and events. And when I was working at USA Wrestling, well, I knew it was coming, that the NCAA was going to make a change, and I knew they were looking my direction. So it's one of those things where just like, okay, you just kind of wait, because it's not my job to tell anybody what's going to happen. And then, she tells folks that, she's no longer going to be there. And then the hardest part about that, even before I got to it, was the social media chatter, because everybody loves Sandy, and I love Sandy. And then, then there's all your friends that you're friends with on Facebook, and you're reading the comments, and they're all your same group. I mean, you look at Sandy's or your Facebook or my Facebook or whoever's mutual friends, 1,000, like 20% of my friends are friends with somebody else. It's that's how we are. And then, you sit there and, you fall into reading the comments, and you're like, they're not talking disparagingly of you. They're talking highly of the other person. You have to be careful of that. And it was like, okay, well, people are not going to be people are not happy that she's not announcing anymore. And then there's the pressure to follow that. Again, following a legend, that
voice in your head and like all that doubt, like
it's the pressure. And, she sent me a message about it, and, before it was announced. And the one thing is I never got to announce my excitement to be able to do it. And I don't, the way they treated Ed, they emailed him. They at least called Sandy. So that's the hard part, is like, I'm not pushing anybody out the door. I had nothing to do with it. And so going into Madison Square Garden, there were a couple added things to it. Yes, the Garden, but 2, your first nationals, but 3, you're taking the plays. Me and Brian are coming in, and we're not the voices people have heard for 40 years. And people were blaming the New York people. It was the NCAA that made the decision. And, the host, the local organizing committee has the call. I get, and me and Sandy worked the Division IIIs the next year in lacrosse. And we worked the Division IIIs in Cedar Rapids. It's been fine. I've worked with her at the Midland since. So it was, that was the added pressure. Wasn't about the Garden. It was bigger than that. It was the wrestling community. So that was the one thing that was really hard about Madison Square Garden in 2016 is, I had the NAIs and the 3s before that. So I had, 2 weeks of prep for what, but when you're at the world's most famous arena, and they've never been in there for the first time. And the last time I was in that building was in 2002 when Ed Aliverti was blurting out Bulgaria when Barzakov beat De Beer. It was, those iconic calls. It's just like there were the pressure wasn't about the event, because I've announced hundreds of events by this point. It was the fact that there are 18,000 people in here waiting for me and Brian to screw up because they love Sandy, and I love Sandy. So that's where it was. Again, this is not it's not disparaging her. It's just, this is where I was sitting during all this stuff. So it's, again, really hard to, who knows? Maybe get Jim Zaleski. So what was it like to follow Gable? What's it like to follow, Matt Small at Great Bridge was coaching there for a while. He didn't coach after Steve Martin left Great Bridge. He goes, why did you want the job? He goes, I don't want to be Martin Zaleski. His exact words. It's hard to follow greatness. And I just hope, go out there and do my best. And we're different styles. And there are things that we did, that Sandy did, and she brought to the tournament that we still do. So the whole standing up thing, like how many nationals have you been? That was her deal. I think it was her, and I think Ed Bankowski came up with that years ago. And we still do that. I also like to recognize the first timers, and that was what I was also really eyeing in Minneapolis, is I wanted to have 25,000 people standing up going to tournament for the first time, because that's how we replenish our fan base, is having an opportunity to see it. Really hard for a high school kid that might like wrestling to go to a spectacle like the NCAA. So 2016, but once we got rolling, so back to enough about the lead up, because that's a lot of me stuff. But again, there was a lot of pressure, because you're like, okay, you've got people at the NCAA you've known that have known you in a different role, and they're hearing you guys, and they were recommended, and you've got other people put their neck out for you too. If you screw up, you've got really good friends that you're going to lose. They're going to lose their status, or you said this guy was good. Their reputation's on the line too, because they recommended you. So, getting that and getting the Olympics, that was another. You talk about, that's a pressure cooker.
Yeah,
but that was.
How the hell do you remember everyone's pronunciation of their names?
I don't remember them. I don't remember them. I have a sheet that I've built, a Google Doc. Now you remember them when you say them enough, but like each year, you're going to say, oh, yeah. Freaking Mongolians, because they're by far the worst. Them and the Russians that move to Hungary, because they add all the like those guys. They're adding letter in the Belarusians because their Cyrillic alphabet is different. But again, I don't need to remember. It's like what is Einstein? I don't want to compare myself to Einstein, but there's an adage or something that's attributed to him is he didn't know his own phone number because it was in the phone book. He didn't need to know it because he could look it up. Kind of like that. Well, I'll have the list of all these names from previous years, and I've got the pronunciations, and I'll get it. I'll say somebody, they'll write it down, and I'll type it in, and I keep that list
at the desk of the Olympics, or like when you go in there, you don't have your cheat sheet with you. Like when you're at the desk.
Oh no. Oh, when beforehand, all the prep work is done beforehand.
Right. So when you get there that morning, every name you're pronouncing, you know how to.
I already have listed. Yeah, wow. I've already researched it. Now, if I don't, sometimes. At the Olympics, because you're going to see these names because it's a lot more condensed. You've got 16 names of bracket. It's not as you don't have 50 names. You don't have the French speaking African country entering the tournament for the first time, and like the kid from Chad who's going to go 0-1. Right. You just got to say his name once. Hope you get it close because you're not going to say it again because he's going to oh, you poor sap from so-and-so that's going to get this guy. Oh, you might get pulled back in. Crap. But a lot of your developing countries in the African nations, which have Nigeria's not so bad, but when Daniel Legali, he'll send you the message and say, hey, he'll voice text you and be like, here's how you say it. That's typically what I do with the Mongolians is I say it once, or the naming convention, like a J is pronounced like a J. It's like not Lusendorja, like it's Lusendorch, like it's a CH. And then in Turkish, you'll see a C that's more like a C with a little accent, like a little, it's like, I don't know, it's like almost like sense, but it's got like C on top of a C. That's pronounced like a J. So it's not Seljuk, but again, these languages have different pronunciations that we're not doing. Now the Chinese, holy crap.
Oh my Lord.
The syllables but again, I try to naming conventions, last name first there. So not Yanan Sun Yanan. And the Chinese are really hard to pop. Like you can't draw Sun Yanan because it means something completely different. So you have to be like, and from China, Sun Yanan. You have to pop it in there, versus some names you got to pop in a way that are more honoring their pronunciation. Some names you draw out and they clearly know what's going on, but that pronunciation thing, it's a lot of work that comes into it. And a lot of work it comes into it. And there's also just the research. So there'll be 900 names for world championships. You've got 286 for the Olympics. So it's what's that? What's the math? 4 times as much work. So the pronunciations, again, you go back, you walk around, you've got friends. I've got friends from all over the world, and I'll send them notes. They're like, hey, how do you say this? Even the Canadians, because they've got the French Canadians in Quebec. So de Châtelet. I go to Canadian. I announce the Canadian trials for the last 2 cycles, or the Commonwealth Games. Like, okay, you got to get these guys right. It's just, it's just a lot of asking questions and a lot of text. And like I know a Chinese referee. I'll go to the referees too, knowing the international referees. You go up. I'll tell Sammy. Hey, Sammy, where's your buddy from Ukraine? Or where's your buddy from Japan? Japanese are pretty easy, but that's the thing. You ask a lot of questions, and then you keep the list. You don't lose the list. Google Docs is great for that because I can go back 2015, the first year I've got an international list for pronunciations. I still use it because there's still athletes competing in there.
Man, I love the system of it too, and just how detail oriented it is. Well, one of the things I wanted to wind down with is when you talk about your current footprint, Mat Talk Network, it's been going again since 2014, and so many thousands of episodes have been hosted on there. And one of the newest programs you're working on, where we have some overlap, Etched in Stone, and I just wanted to hear your thoughts on the Lloyd Keyser one and kind of how that all came about.
The whole series was because I had started an idea when I started the podcast stuff. I kind of pitched it at the Hall of Fame. I was going to try to crowdfund the Legend series, which is where I'd interview people. And what that's basically become is I'd sit down and interview people on Hall of Fame Honors Weekend, and I would drop them out throughout the course of the year. I've added some video to it, and I've still got stuff from 2018 I'm still sitting on. Just I haven't had the chance to sit down and put time and edit it. But and knowing that the Hall of Fame was interested in that, and then of course when Pat Christensen pitches the idea to the Hall first with the Mark Chiarella series, and then you've got the Smith documentary that was bundled in there, and then now Mike Finn wrote the Keyser thing. I just think that, and the next one, which is not a secret now, is I'll be working on Gray Simons, who is I didn't wrestle in college, but I say Gray was my college coach, and I will fight you if you say things about Gray. He wasn't on the 75th anniversary team, which is a travesty. I tweeted this morning that he wasn't on the Flow Top 100 of all time. I'm like, did you know? But to your question, the guy's a 7-time national champ. Okay. He lost one match in college, and it was to the national champ above him from the year before as a freshman. Okay. Like, he did the whole, like, Bryce Meredith bump up Seth Gross type of thing.
Yeah.
That was his only time. Oh, no, they were national champs. Is all it would be like, he did the Dake Taylor thing.
Yeah.
Like, in his freshman year. And that was his only loss. He wasn't even Dake or Taylor yet. But
see, that's why it's going to be so good, because you're so passionate about it.
Yes, but I digress. And I'm going to be heavily biased in that one because Gray farts more wrestling knowledge than I'll ever know. So the Etched in Stone, it really kind of checked that box, because to roll it back a little bit, my first serialized podcast was Rocked Up, where I documented the foundations of the Little Rock program. And that was really what got that one. I talked about feeling of accomplishment earlier when, you don't have it in the newspaper industry anymore sometimes. But when I got done with that thing, and it was raw, it was still the first thing I did. And I didn't soundscape it. I didn't have a score for it. I did it, wrote it, and I did it during a renovation. So I didn't have this yet. I didn't have a studio. I did it from the desk in my corner of my bedroom. So it was not the most ideal editing situation. And it's funny because half the people that I interviewed on that had left by the time the show came out, because they went to go work for the AD, who left to go University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. And it was just like, so working through Rocked Up, I'm like, man, I want to do more of this. I like your documentary. You are doing stuff with your documentary series that I wish I had the time to do. But again, a lot of irons in the fire, a lot of history stuff that I do. I have a list of 400 people to interview that just gets longer.
Dude,
I
let's
could knock
pause,
one off.
Pause on the time. That's what I was going to ask you, is the first time you do one of those and it's like a 19-minute episode, like, you're exactly right. The feeling of accomplishment. Yeah, I get it twice a year. I do 2 of these a year. That's amazing. But just the amount of time it takes to do 5 minutes is staggering, isn't it?
Yeah, because you got to find out. Okay. And to your credit, you've done a lot of research on script writing and stuff like that. So you've put a lot more time into the craft in that regard than I have. And I've just kind of, again, using my experience as a longtime podcast listener and a longtime podcast producer, is being able to put things together and like, okay, I listen to these shows. I'm in the news industry. I know I've written stories my entire life. So maybe, the script writing is not something I have the background in, but I'm sitting there looking at it and formulating it as, okay, this is a 9-minute block of audio. That's not, you're going to have to break that up. You're going to have to get, you're going to have to re-ask the question to set up their response. So it's 2 different voices, things like that. So, and then, with the Etched in Stone stuff with Keezer, having somebody else. Now, again, the 2 episodes or the 2 series with Chirella and Keezer, well, they were written by other people. Pat Christensen wrote the Mark Chirella one, and Mike Finn wrote Lloyd Keezer. So the difference there is I didn't write those. So I'm going back through reading through the script, looking at the transcript. Otter.ai, by the way, is amazing for helping line up transcripts and stuff. So I'm sitting there lining them up, and those took a lot longer than Rocked Up did, because it wasn't fresh in my mind. Pat Smith said this on this episode when we were in the Little Rock Academy here. So working through somebody else's work as a producer and editor is a lot different than your own story that you've written and then you're editing. Again, you can, when you're doing your own production, you can formulate the story the way you want it to go. So you know how to ask those questions. So when I sit down with Gray Simons next week, I know exactly how I'm going to ask questions and where I'm going to do it. So I know where I'm going to put them in the story. Because, Etched in Stone, we have 3 different parts, prior to wrestling career, and then post wrestling career. So that was the one thing. And I thought Pat did a great job of really actually setting us up to have a really successful series. So I learned one thing I loved about doing the Chirella series is I learned a lot about Chirella, and I learned a lot about that year, and I learned a lot about Lloyd Keezer. And it was a situation where, because he was the first African-American, world champ, and it was like, wait a minute, this is big.
Yeah.
And I took some creative license with, I'm going to get Jordan, Mike Finn wrote about a quote that Jordan Burroughs had. I called Jordan and got him to say it.
Mm-hmm.
So you do those type of things to it. So again, bringing that creative element to it, and then having the access to some of these people, like having the ability, like, Jordan, I need a quote that's going to be this is going to just make this part of this episode sing. So the time it takes, and this is where I think I don't get protective of podcasting, because we have so many podcasts out there now. It's like, I don't get mad when anybody gets a guest. Now, sometimes you get somebody before I got them, and I'm like, rare, man, that was on my list. Or like Jim Harshaw got Tim Ferriss. I've been trying to get Tim Ferriss for like 6 years.
You got Tim Ferriss?
Yeah, I got Tim Ferriss, I think, last year. I had Tim Ferriss's, like, I knew Tim Ferriss's producer, and I couldn't get him.
Wow.
And it's just, and it was
that
like
is a dream one, Tim Ferriss. Definitely.
He wrestled at Princeton, those are the things. But, getting Mario Lopez was a good one for me. Getting Matthew Modine was a good one for me. But
you had Mario Lopez. I was just telling my fiance last night, I want Mario Lopez. You son of a gun. Oh,
yeah, I'll probably get him twice. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge.
Wow.
But to again, I tend to ramble much. I love about this. I don't get protective about the podcast space, because me and you can only tell so many stories. You do really good at making sure you're on a schedule. You've got your documentaries and then your weekly stuff. I pointed out this yesterday. It's like, I think I've done 3 short times in the last 2 months. And one of them was a tribute to my dad. So, but again, like, you're traveling, you're announcing, you're doing all this other stuff. It's like, man, but thankfully there are so many people that have learned this craft. And you know what? One of my good friends, Ashley Sword, was from Life University. Ashley Flavin now. She just got married. Congratulations again. Married in October. She's had the chance to tell her story on a couple different podcasts. It's not just hearing it from me. So that's what I love about this medium, is that there's a lot of people that can get these stories out there, because not everybody that listens to you listens to me, and vice versa. Right. Not everybody that listens to headlocks and lat drops is listening to both of us. I mean, and not everybody that listens to Bash Mania is listening to both of us. So we've got the opportunity. Overlap is not a bad thing, because you're gonna the number of listens we know for our shows varies, because you put an Iowa episode out, it's going to shoot through the roof. You put a story about, a small NAIA kid, and who's going to listen to it? Your hardcore people are. So
right.
The time to do it. So I love the fact that we've got a lot of storytellers out there. We're at least getting the stories out there. And if we need to come over top, and we've got we can do the same interview with the same person, but it's not the same interview. I mean,
100%. There's so many ways to do any single one. It's crazy. I mean, and you really only have, so much time per interview. So yeah, I mean, it's such an amazing time. And you look at all the, the foundation and the groundwork that you laid, and then now you're just layering on top. And like you said, all the guys you mentioned, I love Stalemates, Blood Round. Those guys are awesome.
Blood Round's the first show I listen to as soon as it's out. I might have to listen to it 2 or 3 times, because I'll listen to it when it comes out that night, but I'll probably be tired and I'll go to sleep. Crap, I got to go back and download it again. And then sometimes I'll hear like, I was like, dude, I need to download, because I helped them. They were downloading their entire WAV file, or putting their WAV file, the first one, when they first put it out. I was like, why is my data dead? They were putting up 1 gig files into their SoundCloud
How long would that
account.
take to upload?
Oh my goodness. I don't know. Then I taught them how to export from the H4, H5 from the to the MP3, and things got a little better, but it just, I'll wake up and crap, I've slept through it on Overcast. I have to download it again. But to the storytelling part of it, like the Keiser thing, this is where I feel like where I've kind of shifted from journalist. And yes, I still consider myself a journalist. What I do is journalistic. Mm-hmm. And in full disclosure, as the president of the Media Association, I've pulled myself out of certain categories, because I was like I was nominated for Journalist of the Year. So I'm like, no. And I did nominate myself. I was like, I haven't done anything this year that I think warrants that award. So it's not like I'm in it for the awards.
Right.
But again, being able to tell these stories, we need more people to know who Lloyd Keiser is. We need people to know who Gray Simons is. We need people to know the story about, the Smiths documentary had so many things in it. And there's countless more stories out there to be told. And the fact that we've got etched in stone that has the ability to do this now. And the fact that your style and my style are different. Mm-hmm. And that's good, because we've got different ways to tell different stories. And I think that's one thing wrestling fans are going to love. I'm going to look forward to this Gray Simons piece. I think he's 80, 82, 83 years old. And I mean, he's still ride his bike all the time. And there's the list of stories that I want to tell. I mean, all these high school coaches that have coached for 40, 50 years. I mean, I got a list of milestones. There's all these pro wrestlers with backgrounds. Me and Briscoe have talked about doing that series on people into the pro wrestling world that I've had on my list since 2013. It's again, time. That's the hard part, is the time you take. You can't, my wife said that, hey, you say yes to one thing, you got to say no to another. And it's kind of, right. it's kind of tough sometimes when there's so many things I wish I had the hands to do. And I'm a one-man shop. So I edit, do everything I do, but I love these etched in stone things. I love the historical part of it. That's why I like doing the Legend series. That's why I like talking to the people, and I try to again, you're really good at having a conversation. I'm trying to be more conversation based than I am interview based, just because it's hard to unwire your journalism switch sometimes. So yeah, I think the wrestling fans win, and the hard part again is trying to get them to listen to it. I mean, there's still a discovery issue with with good stuff. I mean, it's one thing, and I wish when the Lloyd Keiser thing came out that it had 100,000 downloads first episode. I mean, nobody's going to be Joe Rogan in this sport. So,
right.
Political whatever's aside. So, I mean, it's just, I think we've got some good stuff coming down the pipe. And that's one thing that, it's been great to have that influence in the podcasting side of things. And then, I kind of joke that I'm probably the most copied guy in wrestling history when it comes to things that I brought to the sport. And, sometimes that kind of eats at you a little bit. And sometimes, like with podcasting though, you just look back and be like, how many of these podcasts? I mean, COVID, we had an explosion of podcasts. I mean, I don't know how many episodes did Ward do down in Florida? He did like 1,000 during COVID. It was crazy. So that's always good. Those stories are good. There's stories out there and they need to be heard. So this medium has been a game changer for wrestling. And there's the interview shows, there's the documentary series. Those things are all great. And, there's no one size fits all for podcasting. And that's the one thing that I love about Etched in Stone. It's formulaic, but it's also not. It's serialized, and it tells a story. And I think we haven't had as many people be able to tell stories in the past. We've just had a few.
Yeah.
People always say it's amateur wrestling news. That's all they had. And that's all we did have. And, the internet's been around since the 90s, Intermat and the Mat before it was even owned by,
right.
I think Intermat's had 4 different ownership changes since. And, the Mat.com wasn't first owned by USA Wrestling. That's the series I'm working on too, is the foundations of wrestling on the internet. I mean, I've got one of those interviews done. I gotta have to redo it because I did it 5 years ago. So a lot of irons in the fire, irons in the fire.
Well, it's
never satisfied either.
I love that. And it's obvious when you look at your work because, this podcast wouldn't be here if it wasn't for your help. So thank you very much. And thank you for coming on the show. And it's just awesome an awesome time for wrestling media coverage. So it's been a real pleasure, man. And many years to come, like you said, brother.
Yep. I don't see myself going anywhere else. I mean, I guess Vin Scully's going to have to just keep the seat warm for me.
Awesome.
That's a bit of a ballsy statement. Okay, I'm not coming after you, Vin, because I think Sparks wants that one before I do. He wants Sparks would be better at Vin Scully's job than I was, because I don't know the baseball like he does. But anyway, appreciate everybody listening. Appreciate everybody's listening to Ryan's show, because this show, honestly, it changed the way I did things too, because I'm like, oh yeah, there's things that you do that I'm like, it's like, what's coaching? It's basically stealing from everybody else and then teaching other people how to do it. So, there's some things I've learned from everybody out there. It's the brand new show. It's the old show. It's all this stuff. So, and I'm willing to also give anybody advice. I'm sitting there. I'm just, if you want to know something about podcasting or anything, drop me an email, drop me a DM. I answer everybody. I spend so much time helping people that, I don't need to advertise to pat myself on the back, although this is what I'm doing right now. Thank you for giving me that option. But I do love to help people. If I'd rather you ask me to try to get it right than go out there and do it wrong. And then, hey, help me. I did this wrong. Just ask me beforehand. If you've got any questions, I'm always available. If I'm not, I'll get back to you. Trust me, I'll get back to you.
He does. He's amazing. And no, it's obvious. I mean, message the man. Any questions? Oh, this is the guy to go to. Thank you again, Jason. I appreciate it, man.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Wrestling Changed My Life. This episode was presented by Spartan Combat. Go to SpartanCombat.com to register for the Spartan Combat Nationals coming to Jacksonville, Florida this April 8th through the 10th. Wrestle a different style each day at the Spartan Combat Nationals. And that's it, folks. We'll see you next time on Wrestling Changed My Life.